I'm very happy, everyone, to be joining Marc Perelman to have this discussion with the Foreign Minister, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, Sameh Shoukry, who's had a very long diplomatic and government career in Egypt. You've served as the Minister of Foreign Affairs since 2014, and even had a few stints in the United States as ambassador to Washington and also as Egypt's representative to the United Nations. So I wanted to start this discussion by pointing out that Egypt is the largest country in the Arab world and, of course, has an ancient civilization that we all study. Egypt has been a trailblazer historically in the region and a very important power broker. Regimes have come and gone very quickly in the last decade, and there's been so much change in the region. I thought we could ask you, first off, where you see Egypt's strengths at the moment, its particular role in the region against the backdrop of so many diverse challenges.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be participating in this session, the fifth session of the Med Dialogue. And certainly it is events as this one which brings together representatives from across the region and beyond to deliberate and to consider the various aspects of what is currently happening and how we can do it better. And there's always room for improvement. I think that currently, and I don't want to repeat what was said previously about conditions in the regions and the various challenges that exist. I think that previous panelists have covered that sufficiently, but maybe more to concentrate on Egypt's role in the region. And definitely in terms of its size, in terms of its historical influence, and its the divergence of its social composition, it still does hold a place of prominence and influence in the region and its associations, which go beyond the Mediterranean, being an integral part of the Arab world, of the African continent, of the non-aligned, of the Islamic cooperation. So we have various hats to wear, and I think the premise is that in all of these associations, what we are striving for is stability, security, and fulfilling the aspirations of our neighboring peoples. I think that over the last 5 years, Egypt has demonstrated a resilience to have been able to weather the difficult years subsequent to 2011, to regain a system of governance built upon democratic principles and to create the stability that I believe will be fundamental to expand that stability into the region and provide an environment of greater security.
I want to get to some of the specific cases in your neighborhood. Clearly, one big problem for the region, for Egypt, has been Libya. We're seeing essentially what we can only define as a quagmire. We have two opposite camps. They pretend to negotiate in France and Italy, maybe soon in Germany, but they actually fight much more, and they have proxies. Egypt has been accused of siding with Marshal Haftar, Turkey and Qatar with the government in Tripoli. Do you see any hope on the horizon in Libya, or do you think war will continue?
Well, fundamentally, the situation in Libya can only be resolved by the Libyans themselves and their ability to overcome the divisions that exist. And those divisions aren't simple. They are complex because they are regional, they are political, they are hierarchical, they are ideological, and thereby there is a diversity of conflicting and competing elements, including the fact that Libya is not the typical failed state which is underdeveloped, underdeprived, without any resources and wealth. On the contrary, we have the opposite, and thereby there is an ever-growing degree of desire to manipulate those resources and to exclusively take benefit of them, whether internally or through those external spheres of interest. But I think there is currently a process in Berlin that poses a degree of hope, because we sense that there is more coalescence around the fact that to solve the Libyan problem, we have to find a comprehensive solution, one that deals with all of the various aspects of bringing back the political process to a full implementation of the Sukhairat agreement, dealing with the militias and their influence and manipulation of the Libyan government, the fair distribution of the wealth, building the institutions of governance and having them be truly representative, bringing back the issue of legislative oversight, and of course unification of the army as the only competent authority to secure the stability and the sovereignty of the state. There's a terrorist threat that is exceedingly expanding, and that threatens not only Libya but also the neighboring states and beyond in the Sahel states. So I think it is incumbent that if the talks in Berlin with the 5 permanent members of the Security Council and the main regional interested parties, I believe that that comprehensive solution, if endorsed by the international community, can become a basis for the Libyan people, with the help of Dr. Ghassan Salama as the UN envoy, to bring back the political process to the appropriate track and to bring about a consensus within the Libyans themselves to move ahead towards an electoral process that can create the legitimacy for a government that can fulfill the aspirations of the Libyan people.
Just as a quick follow-up, last time there was a process put in place by Mr. Salameh. There was supposed to be a meeting of all the Libyans, and Marshal Haftar decided to attack Tripoli. How can you negotiate with someone who thinks you can win militarily?
Well, you have to take into perspective that Dr. Salama, who I respect quite highly and who has been undertaking efforts all along to bring about that consensus, unfortunately, was also burdened by not having been able to convene that national conference. And there had, from the beginning and from the outset, been those who had counseled him of the difficulties. And during that extended period, there were sufficient points of agitation that created the movement of the army in opposition to militias, some of them very fundamental, some of them associated to ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and deemed it important to be able to confront those elements. So you cannot really pinpoint a certain point of time or action and revolve around it all the subsequent developments. But I think we have to take the whole situation in its totality and evaluate it objectively.
Minister Shoukry, what about the Israeli-Palestinian peace process? You recently expressed your concerns about the U.S. administration's statement about settlements and how that would set back the process indefinitely. Where do things stand, to your mind?
Well, Egypt's position as relates to settlement has always been consistent. We have condemned the expansion of settlements, considered them a violation of international law and legitimacy, and we have never diverted from that position, along with the Arab League and our brethren Arab states, and I think the overall majority of the international community. But we recognize as well the central role and of the Palestinian issue to the stability and security of the region, and that the Palestinian people are certainly worthy of statehood as other peoples of the region. And I think it is, those rights are overdue in being fulfilled, and it will continue to fester and create pressures on all of the region and the ability to open doors of cooperation and coexistence that would benefit all the peoples of the region if the Palestinian-Israeli question is not resolved, if the two-state solution is not put in place and implemented. We strive to encourage all sides to have the political will and determination to undertake the difficult decisions and make peace. But at the same time, we do not exert any pressure or try to coerce them to do so. This is a matter.
What are you doing concretely at this point?
Well, it is the encouragement. It is the that we would be active participants to secure the peace deal that would be arrived at, to promote it, to provide our assistance, and to open doors of normalization and cooperation, to encourage both the participants, whether Palestinians or Israelis, to undertake the necessary steps to re-engage, but also our partner and the United States to fulfill the vision of a comprehensive peace along the accepted norms of the international community, being the Security Council resolutions and the international legitimacy and international law. For all of those efforts, I can't say that we or others have so far been successful, but we sense that this continuing stalemate is a dangerous situation that can flare at any moment. We've seen in the past where we have had long periods of lull, and everybody thought that the dynamics and the equilibriums that existed could be sustained, and they were proving wrong with very tragic consequences.
The Palestinians have stopped any kind of relations with the U.S. after several decisions. Before even the settlement statement, they say the deal of the century is just hot air. It hasn't been presented, and it's actually not a plan. How can you still believe that the U.S. can be an honest broker on this issue? Isn't it time maybe for Arab countries, Europe, or the Israelis and Palestinians directly to deal with this issue, because the Trump administration doesn't want to do it?
When the Palestinians broke off their contacts with the United States, this was for a variety of reasons related to UNRWA and financial support. And there have been subsequent, of course, issues that also were not supported by the Palestinians or the totality of the Arab world. But still, one recognizes the important role that the United States has played traditionally, and its ability to continue to play an active role, its ability to interact with all parties concerned, and its general weight as a main, or if not the exclusive, superpower. But I wouldn't comment on what was referred to as a deal of the century, because we really don't have any specific knowledge of what that deal contains, other than the indication that it is a comprehensive deal, that it is one that addresses the issue in a more, let us say, in a more out-of-the-box context, but we would think that we would have to see the deal to be able to comment on it objectively.
Minister Shoukry, how do you see energy security as possibly being a diplomatic vehicle for the region?
Well, this is one of, I think, the areas that can promote and generate a higher degree of cooperation between states, especially of the Eastern Mediterranean. And Egypt has been at the forefront. Luckily, we have had major discoveries natural gas in our economic exclusive zone, and that has promoted a higher degree of cooperation with our partners in the Eastern Mediterranean. And we have introduced the idea of creating an Eastern Mediterranean gas hub to promote cooperation, to promote exploration and interdependency and cooperation. And I believe that this is an area where it can produce a more positive interaction among the states of the region to make full use of their natural resources to benefit their peoples, but also to address some of the areas of concern. For Europe, for example, the ability to provide constant gas supply to the European gas network, I think, is an important aspect that will also bridge the divide between Europe and the Middle East and create the dynamics of intergovernmental and interstate cooperation.
Are there any sparring countries that you could foresee becoming peaceful due to energy? Any specific ones?
Sorry?
Any specific countries that you see could benefit
we
diplomatically?
would hope that all states of the Eastern Mediterranean will apply themselves on the basis of cooperation rather than on the basis of confrontation or on the basis of trying to extract exclusively their interests at the expense of others. I think it's a formula that will always lead to disaster because nobody was going to allow the infringement of their rights, or else we will be living under the law of the jungle once again. And I think after in the 21st century, and with all of the current mechanisms that are in place, both regionally and internationally, and a rule-based world order, it would seem counterproductive that we revert to policies that can only bring confrontation and conflict and potentially military activities.
Are you referring to a recent deal signed by Turkey with the government in Tripoli, in Libya, going back, which has been criticized for those very reasons? Is this what you're alluding to?
Well, I was answering the question generally, but
I'm asking
if you want to define it in more specific terms, I think our statement was very clear. I think the situation in Libya currently doesn't need any further complication. And the supposed government in Tripoli, though endorsed by the international community, does have to apply itself within the context of the political agreement. And when the political agreement clearly defines the authority of that government to undertake activities and to enter into legally binding treaties, it has to conform to that treaty, or else it loses its legitimacy. So it's, for us, a very clear-cut legal issue that should be addressed as such. But of course, there are interests. There's no specific infringement on Egyptian interests, but there are interests for other countries in the Eastern Mediterranean. And there is the matter of what is exactly the objective of such an agreement. I think it might have gone into the Guinness Book of Records, and the speed in which there seems to be an effort to try to ratify what is, from a legal perspective, a existing treaty arrangement.
I want to get to a bone of contention between you and Washington over the purchase of 2 Russian Su-35 fighter jets. Egypt is buying them from Russia. The US government has said, if you do so, we're ready to slap sanctions to stop further military purchases. Are you going to go ahead and buy those Russian fighter jets or not?
Well, these are issues that I think you raise out of what has been circulating generally in the media and press circles. These are issues that I think are better dealt with on the basis of what is actually the situation. And I really wouldn't comment any further on that, other than we have a very diverse and important relationship with the United States. We have relationships with various other partners, whether in Europe or Russia or China, and we undertake our relations in full transparency and with recognition of the importance of the strategic relations that exist between us and the United States, but also we have other relationships that I think have a mutual benefit. But on any specific issues that you have raised, and since they are raised,
Secretary Pompeo raised it himself, so it's not just me.
Again, these are issues that are dealt with within the context of bilateral relations and are better left to that context.
On the subject of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, I know he also spoke out after the crackdown on Madam Nasser and just made a statement about the importance of freedom of the press. Have you had that conversation with Washington? Has that come up?
We have an ongoing dialogue with the United States on all issues, and I think we have to be careful in how we describe issues. It's always much easier to use somewhat inflammatory narratives like a crackdown. What exactly is the definition of a crackdown? I wouldn't pose it in those terms. When a representative of the media is asked to come in to the public prosecutor to clarify certain issues and is not imprisoned, is not, no action is taken against that or individual or institution, that does not constitute a crackdown. That constitutes the enforcement of the law, and it should be viewed as such. But in any case, our discussions with the United States on all matters pertaining to the reform ongoing and the manner in which the government addresses the issues of freedom of expression, civil liberties, democratization, human rights is a dialogue that we constantly have, and we are always pointing to the fact that these are issues of an evolutionary nature, that there are specificities that must be taken into account, that the same level of development in different countries necessitates a different evaluation, and that we have to deal with these issues in a comprehensive manner. The human rights is not only an issue of civil and political rights, it is an issue of a comprehensive nature, the right to education, the right to housing, the right to economic development, the right to life, which is constantly Egyptians are threatened by and have been the target of fundamentalist organizations. That is a right also that should be protected and should be emphasized.
What would you like to see more of from the United States for Egypt?
Well, again, we recognize the very important relationship that we have, the strategic nature of that relationship, the vast abilities in the United States as a partner and ally, and I think that a great deal of our success depends on having a healthy and cooperative relationship with the U.S. We want to see the same level of interaction and consultations as relates how best to deal with the issues of the region. We'd like to see also greater U.S. investments in what is a lucrative market in Egypt. Being the largest Arab state, it's an immense market, and a market with very strong relationships to the Arab world and to Africa, to create the necessary employment for, again, 60% of the population under the age of 40. So we have economic challenges, and I think the way in which this government has undertaken its economic reform policies demonstrates a willingness and a commitment, but also demonstrates the ability of the Egyptian people to recognize that hardships have to be met and the confidence that they have placed in the government to be able to have implemented reforms that are now starting to, that we are starting to reap the benefits of in a decrease of unemployment and a healthy growth rate.
I want to get quickly, because there's not much time left, the issue of Qatar. Egypt has been one of the countries that impose a blockade on Qatar. Are you seeing any hopes that the situation can be solved? I was just reading what the Egyptian representative told the International Court of Justice just a few days ago, saying that Qatar supported terrorist operations in the Sinai and so on and so forth. So it doesn't seem Egypt thinks Qatar has changed its ways.
Well, we will evaluate the situation very objectively. We always have hope, and we always desire that relationship between the Arab states is a special relationship built on a long history and the commonality of our cultures and the affinity that the peoples have towards each other. But certainly the policies that the Qatari government has undertaken and the effects on the Egyptian people in its harboring of terrorist organizations and activists, in the support it has been lending fundamental organizations, in its interventions in places like Gaza and Libya, has all been destabilizing to the region. If there was a change of policy, if there was a recognition, I can't say that I do see any change in the policy, but we always have hope.
I am getting a very polite halas in my ear, meaning that our time on this session
and I was just starting to enjoy myself.
If you have a 30-second remark that you'd like to make to wrap up, please.
Well, thank you again for the opportunity. I think to wrap up, I would say that it is the security and stability of Egypt that will resonate through the region. It is the instability of Egypt that will have create a very dire circumstances. Egypt does shoulder its responsibilities in providing an environment of cooperation, of the dealing with the various issues of the region peacefully through negotiations, through compromise. But we have to also be very vigilant in that what has happened in the region and the spread of terrorism. And that terrorism is not only ISIS and Al-Qaeda. That terrorism is the Muslim Brotherhood, is Shabab, is Boko Haram. And again, if the international community is serious in dealing with terrorism, Egyptians have lost their lives. The Christian pilgrims in the Western Desert, women and children have lost their lives in the eastern, northeastern Sinai. We have shed blood because of terrorist organizations, which are unfortunately supported by those who deem that they can utilize those organizations for political purposes. But this genie out of the bottle cannot be contained if we are to focus on terrorism in one area and not to deal with terrorism in a comprehensive manner, addressing all of those organizations. This is an ideological issue and a battle for the prosperity of future generations, but fundamentally all of these organizations have the same objective and deal and operate under the same ideological principles. So we have to, I think, be cognizant of the dangers they pose in the region and the potential of their expansion into the Mediterranean and beyond.
Thank you. There's so many more questions we'd love to ask, but time is up. And we appreciate your time. Thank you very much, Minister Shoukry.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the